We are the largest and most well-resourced PNWER program. We're proud of that. We were launched in 2021 with consecutive grants from the U.S. Department of Transportation Build America Bureau, the Washington State Joint Transportation Committee, and most recently, a congressional allocation. We used to call them earmarks, but we don't do that anymore, from Senators Patty Murray and Maria Cantwell from Washington State to help accelerate exports. We're also engaged in a similar effort in Canada to help double the exports for Canada and diversify the economy beyond just the U.S. markets. Our funding totals around $4 million, and we have, I think, a pretty bright future. This morning, we will hear from U.S. and Canadian leaders about economic corridors. Now, the genesis of this initiative was in 2023 in Regina when Alberta MLA Shane Getson talked about economic corridors. And of course, in his world, everything emanates from Alberta, Hudson Bay, Arctic, BC, Montana, Alaska. It all starts in Alberta. But it was his. I won't mention he's like a whirling dervish of policy and politics with his own plane, his own whiskey, and his own cowboy hat. He's a force of nature, and we're gonna miss him in the public arena, but we hope to continue to work with you. Now, PNWER is binational, and so we look at north-south economic corridors, broadly based, and they really fall into kind of three categories. The Cascadia Corridor, which is basically the coastal corridor of British Columbia, Washington, and Oregon. The really broad Intermountain and Prairie corridors that connect eastern British Columbia, Alberta, Idaho, Montana, and Saskatchewan. Multiple corridors, pipeline corridors, rail corridors, highway corridors. And then, of course, the Western Canada, the five Western Canadian provinces and territories that make up PNWER, and all the potential corridors, whether rail, utilities, pipelines, to Alaska Tidewater. Now, before I turn this over to Lisa Baratta from WESTAC for the conversation with a really good panel on economic corridors, I want to introduce Congressman Nick Begich from Alaska with this video from Washington, D.C. We were hoping to catch Nick because he, like the other two Alaska congressional members, our two senators, tend to commute from Washington, D.C. through Seattle. So we were hoping we could catch him, but there are votes and other obligations in Congress right now, so we couldn't get him physically here. So we have this video, I think it's about 6 minutes or so. I will say, just as an introduction to Nick, his family is a longtime Alaska political family. He is probably the leading member of Congress in advocacy for economic corridors between Western Canada and Alaska, and I assume we'll be talking about that. He also serves on probably the most powerful committee in the U.S. House of Representatives, the House Transportation and Infrastructure Committee, in the majority as a Republican. Now, the committee has passed the Build America 2050 transportation funding program that is now before the Senate. We don't know what's going to happen because right now, as you read in our U.S. Congress, we're talking about the Iran war. We've got midterm elections coming up. There's just a lot of things going on, so we're not sure how far this bill is going to go. And we don't know who will control the House and the Senate come November. But this bill is very important. It replaces the existing $1.2 trillion infrastructure bill that passed in 2021 under the Biden administration. I tried to get my head around 1.2 trillion, and I looked it up, and 1 trillion is 1,000 billion or 100 million. So obviously a major infrastructure bill for the U.S. and something we hope we can approach some of those levels in this new bill. Now, PNWER is blessed to have 4 members of this important House committee. The ranking Democrat, who, if the Democrats take the House in November, will become the chair of this very powerful committee, is joined on the committee by Marilyn Strickland from Tacoma and Val Hoyle from Oregon. Now, equally senior and powerful positions in the Congress from the PNWER jurisdictions are our senators. They serve on the 3 or 4 most important policy committees. We call them authorization committees and appropriations committees, the committees that actually allocate funding. So we're very blessed in the Northwest to have bipartisan, we have 3 red states and 2 blue states, bipartisan, bicameral support for the Northwest interests. And I would say by and large, the delegation gets along very, very well. And as we heard on the previous panel, there's a lot of opportunities on binational energy and critical minerals that those committees are very involved with. So I think if we teed it up, we're ready to see the video.
Hello, everyone. Congressman Nick Begich here, representing the great state of Alaska. It is an honor to join you, even virtually, for this year's Pacific Northwest Economic Region Summit. Thank you for the opportunity to be part of this important conversation. I particularly want to thank Premier Danielle Smith, the government of Alberta, and the summit for bringing together leaders from across the Pacific Northwest and the North. There is no better place to have this conversation because Alberta and Alaska have long understood that prosperity comes from building, from innovating, and importantly, from responsibly developing our natural resources. Alaska and Canada have a unique bond that extends beyond our geography. While we are neighbors, we are also strong partners. Our histories are intertwined. Our economies are connected. Our people have crossed our shared border for generations to build businesses, move goods, and develop resources. And today, that partnership is more important than ever. For too long, many have viewed the Arctic as the edge of the map. In reality, it is increasingly becoming the center of the strategic map for commerce, for energy, for critical minerals, and for the security of North America. Perhaps more importantly, we share something that much of the world cannot fully appreciate. We understand the North. We understand what it means to build infrastructure in difficult terrain, to operate in challenging climates, and to responsibly develop extraordinary natural resources. As global demand for energy, critical minerals, and secure supply chains continues to grow, I believe the North has an extraordinary opportunity before it. The world is changing. Artificial intelligence, advanced manufacturing, critical minerals, and energy infrastructure are reshaping the global economy. Those industries all depend on something fundamental: reliable transportation, reliable energy, reliable supply chains, reliable partners. Fortunately, North America has all 4, but only if we invest in the infrastructure necessary to connect our economies. That is why I am so encouraged by the recent master agreement between the Alaska Railroad Corporation and the Alaska to Alberta Railway Development Corporation. For generations, people have talked about connecting Alaska's rail system with Canada's network and ultimately the lower 48. For more than a century, it has been an ambitious vision. Today, it is taking meaningful steps toward becoming reality. A modern rail connection between Alaska and Alberta would do far more than simply move freight. It would strengthen North America's supply chains, would connect producers to global markets. It would improve access to critical minerals, energy resources, agricultural products, and manufactured goods. It would create jobs on both sides of the border. And it would reinforce something increasingly important in today's world. Economic security begins with transportation security. The proposed corridor represents more than 1,500 miles of opportunity. Designed as a modern heavy-haul railway integrated into the North American rail network, it would move everything from energy products and bulk commodities to refrigerated goods, containers, and critical manufacturing inputs more efficiently than ever before. That is exactly the kind of infrastructure investment that North America needs. Just as importantly, this project reflects how major infrastructure should be developed: through partnership, through consultation, and through a permitting process that is efficient, predictable, and transparent. Because projects of this magnitude require confidence. Investors need clarity and certainty. Communities deserve clarity and certainty. Workers need to know what it means when a project earns approval, and they want to know that it will actually move forward. That is true whether we are talking about rail or ports, highways or pipelines, energy infrastructure or transmission. If North America wants to remain globally competitive, we have to become better at building. That means embracing innovation. It means modernizing our transportation networks. It also means reducing unnecessary delays while maintaining high environmental standards. And it means recognizing that every year lost to uncertainty is an opportunity gained by someone else. As we look ahead, there's another reason our partnership has never been more important. The Arctic is no longer a distant frontier. It is a strategic frontier. The decisions we make today about infrastructure, transportation, energy, and investment will shape the future of the Arctic for decades to come. Both Alaska and Canada understand that reality clearly. As global competition intensifies, the Arctic has become increasingly important. Nations that do not share our values are expanding their presence, investing in Arctic infrastructure, pursuing critical minerals, and seeking influence over emerging shipping routes. The United States and Canada cannot afford to stand still. Our response must include stronger economies and modern ports, reliable rail and efficient highways, secure energy systems and critical mineral development, advanced communications, and resilient supply chains. These are strategic investments that will strengthen our position as leaders in the Arctic. North America should never be dependent on geopolitical competitors for the resources, infrastructure, or transportation networks that power our economies. In short, we have the resources, we have the talent, we have the technology. Now we need the political will to build. The relationship with Alaska and Canada has always been built on trust. I firmly believe the future of North America will be shaped in large part by what we choose to build in the North. Together, we can responsibly develop the resources the world needs and build the transportation networks that connect our economies. And together, we can demonstrate that economic growth, responsible stewardship, and national security are not competing priorities. They reinforce one another. Thank you for your partnership. Thank you for your friendship. And thank you for your shared commitment to building a stronger, more secure, and more prosperous North America.
Congressman is obviously a very articulate spokesman for cross-border cooperation, and it's been a pleasure to work with him. I'm going to ask Lisa and her panel to come on up. While they're coming up, I just want to mention many years ago, I remember taking delegations of legislators and members of Congress and port folks up to Vancouver and Prince Rupert to look at the Asia Pacific Gateway and Corridor Initiative, which some of you would remember as a focused and strategic effort by Canada to invest in Western trade and transportation corridors. A very impressive organization. And of course, now you have additional resources to invest in your trade and transportation corridor. I also admired WESTAC, which is this unique organization that Lisa represents that combines business, labor, and government in common cause to support supply chains and freight networks in Western Canada. It's a remarkable organization. I wish we had one in the Northwest, but Lisa is here to lead our panel on economic corridors in the future. Lisa?
Thank you, Bruce. Like Bruce said, WESTAC, we're a member-based organization that brings together senior leaders from across Western Canada's freight transportation system, including major exporters, importers, railways, ports, terminals, trucking, provincial governments, territorial and the federal government, and most important, and also labor unions. Our focus is on improving the performance, resilience, and competitiveness of the transportation networks that connect Western Canada to North American and global markets. Today's discussion focuses on a topic that is becoming increasingly important across both Canada and the United States: economic corridors. So what are economic corridors? At their core, economic corridors are much more than highways, railways, or ports. They are integrated networks of transportation infrastructure, logistics hubs, border crossings, gateways, with supply chains that connect producers with customers and regions with economic opportunity. They're the systems that allow trade to happen. This map here illustrates the economic corridors across Western Canada. Whether we're talking about agricultural exports from the prairies, critical minerals from the northern regions, energy products or manufactured goods, economic corridors connect production regions to processing facilities, inland logistics hubs, ports, border crossings, and ultimately international markets. These corridors are becoming increasingly important as governments and businesses focus on economic growth, competitiveness, supply chain resilience, and trade diversification. In Canada, the Prime Minister has established an ambitious objective of doubling exports to non-US markets over the next decade, while recognizing that continued growth in trade with the United States, our largest trading partner, remains essential. Achieving these objectives will require more than trade agreements and market access strategies. It will require efficient, reliable, and well-connected economic corridors. It will require investments that increase capacity, reduce bottlenecks, and strengthen connections between jurisdictions. And it will require collaboration among governments, Indigenous partners, infrastructure owners, transportation providers, and others in the private sector. We're fortunate to have an outstanding group of speakers with perspectives from government, economic development, trade gateways, and transportation planning to discuss the issues today. So joining us today are the Honorable Devin Dreeshen, Alberta's Minister of Transportation and Economic Corridors and past Chair of WESTAC's board, Diane Gray, President and CEO of Prairies Economic Development Canada, Prairies Can, and Alexa Young, Senior Vice President, Global Public Affairs and Partnerships with the Vancouver Fraser Port Authority. Please join me in welcoming our panelists. Minister Dreeshen, I'll invite you to begin with some opening remarks.
Perfect. Well, thank you very much, everybody, for being here today. I wanted to just comment on when we kicked it off, the 3 red states and the 2 blue states. The majority that we have here in Alberta is almost the same in the legislature. It's a very thin provincial majority that we have in our House. But I just wanted to do a quick shout out to my elected provincial colleagues here in the room today. We have Shane Getson, who already got an awesome introduction. It's hard to beat that, so I won't even try. He's an amazing colleague. Garth Roswell is here as well, as long as Jackie Armstrong-Hominick in the back, Eric Bouchard, Ron Weeb is here. If I've forgotten anybody else, please. Oh, Scott Sear, Parliamentary Secretary, who's amazing on economic corridors, so he should definitely bend his ear later on today as well, because he's a tremendous advocate, not just for economic corridors, but also on the military strategic of economic corridors out to the F-35 military base out in his riding as well. And my last shout out to an Albertan will be Nathan Cooper. He is the former speaker here in Alberta's legislature, and he's Alberta's representative in DC. So he knows all the palace intrigue about what goes on in Alberta. But obviously, good morning, everyone. It's great for you all to be here and engage in meaningful dialogue of how we can collaborate together when it comes to economic corridors. And obviously, PNWER has become a powerhouse of innovation, trade, and collaboration. And cross-border cooperation is at the very heart of our mission. Economic corridors obviously connect Canada and the United States in a spirit of mutual respect and benefit that is obviously more talked about in the media than it was years ago. But we can't obviously tackle issues such as supply chain bottlenecks or workforce shortages alone. Working together, we can find solutions that work for all of us. As we begin our conversations today, we'll focus on 3 key priorities. First, enhancing infrastructure to meet today's demand. Second, promoting real environmental stewardship with our corridors. And third, strengthening cross-border cooperation. And I'm looking forward to our discussions today and to highlight some of the very important work going on here in Alberta. I'm pleased to announce that Alberta's government is actually providing a grant of $100,000, which is about 70,000 US, so not everybody get out of their chair, to Canada's division of PNWER to assist in Alberta's specific programs and projects. And Alberta's government continues to emphasize growing and expanding our economic corridors through our investments of $8.3 billion. Now that's a tougher conversion to make in our 3-year provincial capital plan. And we're also moving ahead with several key investments in highway expansion projects, Alberta also signed several memorandums of understandings with Saskatchewan, Manitoba, Northwest Territories, and even Ontario, even though that goes outside the purview of PNWER. But we're also working with the Port of Prince Rupert in British Columbia to study opportunities of the Pacific Northwest through economic corridors along Highway 16, between the industrial heartland here in Edmonton and the Prince Rupert, BC Pacific Coast. So by now you've likely heard of the plans for the new pipeline to carry Alberta bitumen 1 million barrels per day to the West Coast to meet the demands of our trading partners in Asian countries such as South Korea, China, and India. Now, the plan is to construct that new pipeline within the existing Trans Mountain corridor between the town of Bruderheim, just northeast of Edmonton here, to the Roberts Bank terminal in Delta, BC on the Pacific. Now, those are just a few things that Alberta is working on to grow our economy by expanding networks that meets the needs of tomorrow. And I'm looking forward to hearing from you about our commitments that you are making to build a stronger, sustainable, and resilient transportation network to position the Pacific Northwest as an economic powerhouse. And thank you for all attending here today, and I hope that you enjoy Alberta. Thank you.
Diane?
Hi, good morning, everyone. As Lisa noted, I'm Diane Gray, and I'm the president of Prairies Economic Development Canada, which is the Government of Canada's regional economic development agency for Alberta, Saskatchewan, and Manitoba. Prior to starting this job about 3.5 years ago, I was the founding president and CEO of Centerport Canada, which is one of Canada's largest inland ports and one of the largest inland ports in North America. So I have a different lens upon which I also think about the importance of strategic infrastructure investment and the opportunities that it presents for business and export. Now at Prairies Can, our client are small and medium-sized businesses. And so we work directly with businesses, communities, and innovators in partnership with provincial and municipal governments to help build a strong, competitive, and resilient prairie economy. And how we do that is primarily through investment supports into small and medium-sized businesses to help them scale and to take advantage of opportunities. But we also invest in community economic development and innovation. And another part of our goal, and I think this is probably relevant to many of the legislators here, is we help to bring that prairie perspective to national tables in Ottawa. There's obviously many opportunities that our region has the opportunity to take advantage of, and you've heard a lot about those here this morning. Our region is obviously home to world-class agriculture and agri-food, energy, critical minerals, manufacturing, transportation, logistics, and technology. And we are a region that moves, builds, produces, and exports. And how we do that successfully really depends upon how we connect our strengths to markets across North America and around the world. And that's why today's discussion and the work on economic corridors is so critical. And when we talk about corridors, it is easy to just focus on the physical infrastructure. And that is obviously really important. The roads, the rails, the ports, the pipelines, the airports, the inland hubs and terminals, and they're essential. However, economic corridors are about more than just infrastructure. They really are about connection. They connect producers to processors, businesses to customers, workers to opportunities, communities to markets. And in a region as vast as the Prairies, and so if you think about the South, but also about the North, those connections are not a luxury. They're fundamental to how our economy works. And at Prairies Can, we see that every single day. Last year alone, we helped more than 8,500 small and medium-sized businesses grow their revenues, and we supported billions of dollars in export growth. And those numbers tell an important story. The small and medium-sized businesses that are the backbone of the Canadian economy, with the right support, the right infrastructure, and the right market access, they can compete and they can win. And in my experience, the strongest economic corridors share three common features. First, they work as systems. A corridor does not succeed simply because it has a strong port, highway, or rail infrastructure. It succeeds when you think about the whole network together, when infrastructure, logistics, digital systems, border processes, and local supply chains come together to reinforce one another. Second, successful corridors are built around a long-term economic vision. The infrastructure decisions we make today will help shape trade patterns, investment decisions, and industrial growth for decades. That means aligning industrial planning with transportation, workforce needs, land use, Indigenous partnerships, and access to global markets. And third, strong corridors help economies adapt. Over the past decade, global disruptions have shown how quickly markets and supply chains can change. The regions that succeed will be the ones that can respond with agility by helping businesses pivot, innovate, and seize new opportunities. And that is the lens we bring to this work at Prairies Can. Earlier this year, we helped to launch the Alberta Logistics Centre of Excellence at Mount Royal University in Calgary. The center is helping to commercialize innovative transportation and logistics technologies while supporting stronger and more resilient supply chains. And its programming will help supply chain leaders understand changing trade conditions and adopt the tools and technologies needed to strengthen connections across the logistics system. That matters because infrastructure and connections alone are not the end goal. The goal is stronger growth, higher productivity, and long-term prosperity for the communities and businesses that rely on those connections. Looking ahead, we know Canada needs to diversify and strengthen its trade relationships while continuing to deepen the North American partnerships that are so important to our region. The new $5 billion Federal Trade Diversification Corridors Fund is significant. It is designed to support infrastructure projects that improve access to international markets, strengthen Canada's competitiveness, and support more reliable trade flows. For the PNWER region, this is important. This region sits at the intersection of major North American and Asia-Pacific trade routes. Investments and further strategic investments in multimodal transportation links, inland ports, port expansions, and digital infrastructure can strengthen those existing corridors while opening up new important opportunities for exporters. And as we heard from the congressman from Alaska, it is also time to recognize the importance of northern and Arctic corridors. Yes, the challenges are significant: weather, high costs, environmental sensitivities, and the need for sustainable development. But the opportunity is more significant. This work critically must be done in partnership with Indigenous communities. And there's work underway in Canada to open up and expand new Arctic ports, with the Port of Churchill and the new port at Grays Bay in Nunavut. Many of Canada's most strategic trade routes cross Indigenous lands. So building successful corridors means supporting co-development, equity participation, and long-term revenue sharing. Not because it's just the right thing to do, but because it is essential to building durable projects, lasting trust, and shared priority. So as we begin today's conversation, I hope we keep one idea at the center of it. Economic corridors are not just pathways for products, they are pathways for opportunities. When we invest in corridors, we invest in business, workers, and communities. And we invest in the ability of our regions to adapt, to reach new markets, attract new investment, and build stronger, more resilient economies. Successful economies are connected economies. Thank you.
Alexa.
Hi, everyone. Wonderful to be here today. I actually made it just in time yesterday to catch about 50 Spaniards lose their mind at a pub down the street when they took the World Cup. And I don't know if it's just because I hail from a FIFA host city or that we celebrated Canada Day earlier this month, or simply that it really feels like we have serious getting big things built energy happening in Canada right now. But it really is starting to feel like it's Canada's year. And that's certainly how we feel at the Port of Vancouver, where we're all about Team Canada 365 days a year. And I'm not just talking about this Team Canada, the team that made us proud on the world stage over the past few weeks. I'm talking about the quieter Team Canada, the team of longshore workers, tug and crane operators, railroaders, truckers, who are delivering for Canadians all year round, who are shipping $1 billion a day out of the Port of Vancouver, $1 billion a day, each day of the year. And a lot of that is the stuff that Canadians make, mine, harvest, and grow, whether that's British Columbia minerals, metals, Alberta energy, Saskatchewan potash, Manitoba wheat, Ontario machinery and equipment, and I actually originally from New Brunswick, so I'd be remiss if I didn't include Atlantic Canadian seafood. But you name it, we probably shipped it last year to about 150 export markets that we ship to. And as Canada looks to continue to diversify our trading relationships to double exports to non-US markets in the next 10 years, we know at the Port of Vancouver, we're going to play an outsized role. And why is that? It's because we already do. We're Canada's largest port, bigger than the next 5 biggest ports combined. We're North America's most diversified port in terms of our cargo handling and the types of products we handle and ship. And because of our proximity to Asia-Pacific markets, just think about this. The Indo-Pacific is going to account for 50% of global GDP by 2040. Just think about how many customers that want and need what we make. And I want to assure our American friends, many of you are in the room today, that you are our friends, that as our two nations continue trade talks, the best outcome for all of us is if we are able to maintain and grow that trade relationship that we hold so dear. But we also know as a country that we must continue to diversify. And on top of that, we know that we're only going to do that if we continue to build on our track record of investments. Just think about this at the Port of Vancouver. Over the last 15 years alone, we've expanded trade capacity by around 75%. So even before uncertain times, we knew that we needed to grow capacity to be able to reach these exponentially growing markets looking west. On top of that, we have nation-building projects on the horizon. Projects like the Second Narrows dredging works that's about to start in September. That's going to see us slightly narrow the channel under the Second Narrows Bridge in Burnaby so that oil leaving TMX through Westridge Terminal, those ships are able to cross under that bridge at closer to 100% capacity. Right now, they're only at about 70% capacity. Talk about optimization. Projects like BHP's $1 billion investment at West Shore Terminals to expand potash export facilities. And of course, game-changing projects like Roberts Bank Terminal 2. This is a project that's going to unleash $100 billion in additional container trade annually. It's going to build new land. This is a project that's been over 10 years in the making, that has its environmental assessment approvals in place, the consent of 27 nations. It was part of the federal government's major announcement last week about a Port of Vancouver Gateway strategy, which I'll speak to a little bit later on. But this is game-changing stuff. And most importantly, as we look to play our outsized role in Canada's export growth future, we know that to be successful, we're going to have to keep doing what we do right, safely, with care for the environment, and in partnership with First Nations. And I can tell you that Team Canada at the Port of Vancouver and all of our partners are up to the task. So looking forward to the conversation today.
Thank you very much. As an opening question for all the panelists, what would you say are the opportunities for economic corridors across Western Canada to grow and for the region to strengthen its role as a North American trade gateway?
I'll take that first just because I'm going in order.
Yep.
No, well, I think there's a tremendous opportunity, and I know it's been talked about before, and I think everybody in this room agrees that if we don't get this right, the rest of the world is going to get it right, and they're going to outcompete us, and it's just going to be a lost opportunity cost. And I think there's so many projects, there's investments that are in all of our jurisdictions that we always just thought, if we would have done that sooner, we would have been seeing the benefits. And when you look around the world, you see countries that do get it right, that are making these strategic investments, and they're seeing that growth. So that's something that we all, especially as elected officials, we all want to make sure that we have good mortgage paying jobs for people that elect us. And the easiest path, the best path to do that is through these types of strategic economic corridor investments. So I think it's very incumbent on all of us. And I think obviously through PNWER, there is that close collaboration of all of us seeing the benefits of working together, being able to get our products to market, and us as a team. So I think there's a tremendous, the demand is there, the why is there, but the how, I think, is always what's up for debate of how can our provincial, state governments collaborate together with the changing, political landscapes that happen all the time, U.S. midterm elections, our provincial elections coming up next year. So there's always going to be that influx. But the how we can do it, I think the best way to come to that answer is through these types of forums, these open dialogues, to just look at project-specific initiatives and how we can get that done. So it's on all of us to find out those answers.
I think a lot of the I'll say key points have been touched on, whether this panel or the one before. I mean, this region, whether it's the Pacific Northwest of Canada or the United States, with its agri-food products, the critical minerals, and the other advanced manufacturing pieces that are produced here are in high demand around the world. And so I think, as the minister said, the why we should build stronger economic corridors has been well established. And I would say that from the inside of the Government of Canada, you can really sense the tone change and the urgency of wanting to accelerate decision-making and accelerate the potential for new infrastructure development and new private sector investment development. And I think that that's key. It's not just what governments can do. Lisa Baton in the panel before on energy said something that I thought was particularly important and perhaps may not have been seized upon in the way that it probably should have been necessarily. And it was, governments can't do this in isolation of industry. And one of the reasons these conversations is really important is that it brings together industry along with government leaders to have these conversations. And I would just say that as we're developing and looking to position investments in economic corridors, they need to be strategically made with industry at the table so that the supply chains, so the investments are actually accelerating, facilitating supply chains, and working in a whole corridor mentality.
Yeah, great answer. I like to think about it in terms of systems. Taking a step back, this is really about three things. It's about Canada making more stuff, so making more stuff, mining more stuff, farming more stuff. It's about making sure we have the people identified that want to buy that stuff, markets around the world. And then the next part is where we come in. It's getting that stuff to those customers reliably, on time, on budget. And What's that going to take? It's going to take building more things, more trade enabling infrastructure. I just mentioned some of the core projects that the Port of Vancouver is advancing. And it's not just about building things, though, it's about optimizing. So using new digital tools and tech so that we are using data to talk in real time across the supply chain to make sure that, again, we're getting products where they need to be when they need to get there. And lastly, and I can't emphasize enough how important this is, we need to do it right. I think it's really critical to understand at this moment in time, it's great news. We have the majority of the Canadian public on side, on board with getting big things built, but we all know that the pendulum can swing. We need to maintain social acceptance for what we're doing here to make sure that when those investments are being made, that we're seeing them through to construction. We're getting these projects built and people continue to be on side. And so I think if we get all of that right, the sky's the limit in terms of what Canada can accomplish in terms of the opportunity.
Alexa, you spoke in your remarks a bit about the Vancouver Gateway Strategy announcement last week. Would you like to expand on that?
Sure, absolutely. Big announcement by the federal government last week at the Port of Vancouver. The exciting thing about this Gateway Strategy is that it really showcases that this is Canada's port. You know, I talked about Roberts Bank Terminal 2. It's going to be referred to the Major Projects Office, which means it's going to have the due attention of government to finally get up and built. And we keep saying it's the first rock in the water. Again, this is building new industrial land. This is also about identifying new bulk export opportunities. So looking at, are there more places where we can build new land for commodities across key sectors? And then, of course, it will include consideration of Alberta's pipeline proposal to the same area as the Roberts Bank Terminal 2 project. These are two separate projects in the same area. So it will require some consultation with industry, with ourselves, and with the local First Nations to figure out what that looks like. We're excited about having those conversations in the coming weeks and months. And lastly, it also includes rail capacity. Again, we all can't look at this from a siloed perspective. This is a system. And so the government will also be looking at launching a rail strategy in partnership with railways as it looks to launch the strategy moving forward.
Can I just on Roberts Bank, it is interesting that major project out in Vancouver, and I see Rob Merrifield is here, who's a federal member of parliament back in 2006, and I think that's when it first actually came to the attention of Canadians of having Roberts Bank. I think it was 2006, so that's 22 years ago. So you know, when I talk about the why and we have to do this and others are taking advantage of it, think about what's happened in the last 22 years. And here's a project that is going to Majors Projects Office, and I agree with my fellow panelists that there's optimism now being felt. But this is a perfect example of a project that critically needs to get accomplished. And it is great to see that also, and I know Premier Smith is going to be, Alberta's Premier is going to be speaking here later, and she'll do a much better job at explaining this than I. But the million barrel per day pipeline and that project being attached to Roberts Bank is so critical for Alberta and for our region to be able to get our resources out to market. So that is a very important project, and I'm hoping that not just the why we have to do it, but the how we do it. We can see how other jurisdictions be able to build their projects, get that social license, if you want to call it that, but to make sure that we can actually get things approved in a timely manner to take advantage of opportunities that exist today and in the near future. So I'm excited by the optimism in this sense of let's build big things. But I think it was a great American politician that said trust but verify, and I think we're in that mode right now with the federal government.
We spoke a little bit about collaboration. Maybe everyone can go into a little bit more detail about how you are collaborating with others to improve the economic corridors across the West.
Sure. Well,
Go ahead. Yep.
Sorry, now I'm monopolizing. I would say, you know, back and to Shane Getson's work back in the early 2000s or 2020s, through economic corridors, talking about the importance of it. Alberta back in 2022, Premier Danielle Smith made me Transportation Economic Corridor Minister. And since then, we've signed memorandums of understanding with Saskatchewan and Manitoba, with the Northwest Territories, just recently with Ontario, like I said in my opening remarks. So trying to build these nation-building projects and being able to advocate for infrastructure that ties together, as well as project-specific initiatives, that's something that we've been doing for 4+ years here in Alberta, and it's great to see that collaborative effort. And I would just say, hats off to Matt and the PNWER team for the work that they've done in that period as well to build that collaboration. So it's not just putting a feather in our hat saying that we've been on this for a long time. Thanks for everybody else catching up to us. But it is something that we know that PNWER and groups and people in this room have done a great job of collaborating, and we just need to continue that important work.
Go ahead.
Sure. Well, just further to the minister's point, if any of you are looking for a great report on Western trade corridors, Western Premier's actually released. I was not involved in that, so I can just say give a little shout out to the Western provinces for a great trade corridors report, which I think goes into a lot more detail on a lot of these issues and looks at priority opportunities across the West. Very specific to some of a project that we're supporting at Prairies Can, so I'll speak to that, is actually in Manitoba, part of Western Canada, but perhaps a bit outside the range of PNWER. But in Manitoba, and as I noted before, I was at Centerport Canada, but now we are supporting work that is underway between the Port of Churchill, which is Canada's only deep water inland ocean port in the Port of Churchill, the Winnipeg Airports Authority, and Centerport Canada around an integrated trimodal supply chain for producers within that region. And Prairies Can has been a supporter of the Port of Churchill now since 2018, when the former owner walked away from that particular asset. It's now primarily Indigenous community owned by 40 northern communities. And it's a board of directors that is primarily Indigenous led. It's comprised of both the inland deep sea port operations as well as the Hudson Bay Rail Line. And why we took this on, because when I spoke about community economic development, there is a number of communities in northern Manitoba that rely on that bay line for complete access. They do not have roads, they do not have airports. And so from a community stabilization perspective, we took on that support. But now that asset is starting to come into its own. And, whether you call it climate change or global warming, but it's definitely having an impact on the shipping lanes in northern Canada, and I'm sure in Alaska as well. And so it's opening up trade opportunities for longer shipping seasons. So for example, typically those shipping seasons without icebreakers were 4 months of the year. They're now reaching 6 months of the year. And with icebreaker technology that's used in many parts of the world, but not currently in northern Canada for economic purposes, it could be open year round. And so that is a really interesting Indigenous owned opportunity that will in no way rival the Port of Vancouver. So, but is part of a future solution for some of the inland shipping to market specific to Europe, the Middle East, and North Africa. So very different shipping opportunities, but it's something that we are working with a number of private sector partners to help advance.
I would just add that new technologies are really amping up our ability to collaborate. I've talked a lot about moving goods. Port of Vancouver also moves people. We have cruise operations, and about 1.5 million cruise passengers go through the Port of Vancouver every season. 80% of those passengers are American. And in the past couple of years, we've partnered with Custom and Border Protection Services to put facial biometrics technology in place that's actually decreased the amount of time it takes a passenger to go through and check in by 95%. It takes less than 10 seconds now. So a great example of just how technology is helping us collaborate on the movement of people and goods.
Let's turn to some of the audience questions, and if anyone has any questions, please add them to the WOLVA app. But we've got one here about what can be done to co-invest in dual-use infrastructure, so our roads, rails, rivers, and ports strengthen both trade corridors and emergency or security readiness across the region.
Well, I'd say what we're open to as a provincial government is P3s, private-public partnerships. And so I think it's something that we're obviously interested in certain industries being able to help invest with us, because as I said, we have an $8+ billion capital budget, but it could easily be twice or even bigger of that size. So I think that is something that if we can utilize private industry funding as well, as something that we're always open to. But I do look around this room and see a lot of municipal leaders as well. And I think that is something that, whether it's the prioritizing of projects or the funding of projects, I think that is something that, as I talked earlier about having provincial, state, federal cooperation, we also need that municipal cooperation as well. So to make sure that everybody is on that same page is really important. So I'm assuming that's probably the case in other jurisdictions as well, of that openness to that private investment. But it's we're open for business here in Alberta. So if anybody has any ideas, we're all ears.
Maybe just building on that comment, we often talk about the big projects, trade enabling projects that need to get built, but sometimes not so much the less sexy infrastructure, like the underpasses, overpasses, bridges, tunnels that all are required not just to move goods, but also in the surrounding communities due to increased traffic. And so that's a question that we all need to grapple with if we're looking to double up our exports and trade capacity, is that some of those periphery, both trade but community infrastructure projects need owners, they need funding, they need collaboration in terms of figuring out what those things look like. And so really important.
Could I maybe come at it from a bit of a slightly different perspective around dual use? So when I hear the term dual use infrastructure, I often now think about opportunities for expanded defense use as well as economic use. And I think that when you're looking at port expansion or you're looking at high airports and airport usage, in many ways, I think now planning is underway to think about how they might have a dual use opportunity in the future, with Canada scaling its commitment on a GDP basis to meet the NORAD target, the NATO target. The other piece I want to say around dual use and security infrastructure is that we are in I'll say a rolling season, it seems, of pretty significant wildfires. And it was an experience felt here in Western Canada last year in particular, the year before in parts of Northern Canada. And now we're seeing it in Ontario and parts of Quebec. And in many cases, the access to airports and evacuation zones, whether it's for water bombers and others, are also part of that security infrastructure that we need to be thinking about preparing for and planning for, that if done in conjunction with economic opportunities can also have a dual use. So Ring of Fire, as an example, in Ontario is in the exact zone where there's many wildfires right now, but future infrastructure could help to support protection of those communities and that fire zone as well.
Minister Dreeshen, industry often says governments need to de-risk private investments in transportation and energy projects. What actions has the government of Alberta taken, and what more would you like to see from the government of Canada?
Great question. And I agree. I think the role of government is to set the playing field for industry to be able to invest, and de-risking is important. But I think what we have seen in Canada is not so much a de-risking, but a nationalization of certain big major projects. Something with TMX, with pipeline from Alberta going out to the West Coast, got built, which is great from an Alberta perspective and great for a royalty perspective to get extra tax dollars. but it had to be nationalized. The federal government had to buy that project from Kinder Morgan to be able to build it and finish it. That's something that's concerning, I think, and something that we want to do everything that we can just to try to level that playing field to attract investment, because most places around the world obviously have a very open, competitive market in which people can invest into big major projects, and those investment dollars follow. There are other states that use state money to buy state projects and then to go and build whatever the big major projects are. We obviously don't have that in Canada. So I think we have to calculate this right to make sure that we can set the playing fields both provincially and federally to make sure that we can attract investment for these big major projects that we all see that the world needs, whether it's critical minerals, whether it's energy. We have all of that here in PNWER's region. So to be able to make sure that we can have the transportation logistics to get those to market, critically important, but we also have to create that investment climate that sees private sector banging on our door, wanting to make sure that they can build it. So it's very important, and the answer to that question is going to be very telling, I think, in the next 10 years when we see if we're able to build projects here in the western part of Canada.
One part of economic corridors that's vital, of course, is our railways, and not just the main lines, but also the short line railways. What can be done to support the short line rail role in economic corridors? I don't know if Minister Dreeshen.
I guess you're a port, so you can cover short lines. Yeah. No, I would say it is something that, and I see with my friends in Saskatchewan that have actually done a much better job of expanding short lines than we have here in Alberta. And I think a lot of it just goes on history of the big major rail lines here in Alberta, CP and CN, of when they move away from certain alignments that just got lost. And the Saskatchewan government just historically did a better job of picking up those short lines. And obviously, as a transportation minister, when you see our roads that are being used heavily, because now we're not seeing heavy cargo on rail, but on roads, steel wheels versus rubber wheels, that's something that it has been chewing up our roads a lot more than we'd like to see. So I think that is something that, we take a playbook out of Saskatchewan's book is something that we're looking at here in Alberta. But I think it is a tremendous opportunity of whether it's expanding short lines or even rail spurs to certain companies. In my own riding near Red Deer, in between Edmonton and Calgary, we have a massive new flour mill that's P&H is coming in that's going to serve most of Western Canada. And they have a rail spur line coming off on the main line. But again, it's that combination of trucking and rail capacity that is needed. So I think short line is very important and something that we'll definitely see expanded in the future.
Do you have anything to add?
Yeah, I would just add that as part of this rail strategy that the government is going to be consulting with the railways and industry on, all tools and levers have to be on the table for consideration, and short lines would be included in that.
Alexa, did you want to comment on about the rail modeling study that the port's doing?
Yeah, we do rail modeling on a regular basis in partnership with industry tenants, so terminal operators, as well as the railways, to have a clear multi-year view into what demand looks like, where there might be some gaps, to really help all of the above plan for the future.
Imagine that'll be a good starting point for the Major Projects Office.
Yeah, absolutely.
So PNWER's long supported a strong USMCA and CUSMA framework and expanded trade among jurisdictions in the region. At the same time, Canada is pursuing a goal of growing trade with global markets beyond the United States. How do we advance both objectives, deepening Canada-US trade and investment while also expanding access to overseas markets?
Well, I just say we have to walk and chew bubblegum. Obviously, from an Alberta perspective, our largest trading partner is the US by far. But to be able to diversify and to sell our products around the world is a huge priority. Something I mentioned obviously before was Roberts Bank going out to the Pacific, as well as this new 1 million barrel a day pipeline going to the Pacific. And just a unique issue that we have here in Alberta is obviously for our natural gas and our oil, if it is just going straight down to the United States, which obviously is a good thing, we sell it at a discount because we don't get that global price. So it is something that is in Alberta's and all of Canada's best interest to make sure that that global price is realized and something that we can all have that greater benefit. So trade diversification is important, but you would never ever want to make sure that you're cutting off your biggest customers. So I think it's doing both at the same time is extremely important. And when you're in the business of making friends, when it comes to an exporting province, you want to make sure that you can make sure that all your customers are happy.
I think that's right. It has to be a dual track imperative. And it should have been a dual track imperative prior to the current dynamics. Diversification is good. You're growing the pie for Canadian prosperity.
I concur that the two goals are complementary. They're not contradictory. And I would say diversification has been talked about for decades. I mean, I was at a trade game before, and it has been talked about for a long time. I just think the current imperative is encouraging business to look at new opportunities, which should have, as a result, overall economic growth. So I don't see them in any way as competitive goals. I see them as complementary.
Reliability is going to be one of the key success factors for the corridors. What can be done to minimize the threat of disruptions, whether it's caused by labor or wildfires or other disruptions, supply chain disruptions that occur?
On the labor front, that has been something that has hit here in Western Canada for quite some time, whether it is at the port or at the railways. Something that we've just seen union disruptions and essentially a shutdown of our economic corridors in Western Canada. So that has been something that I know the Western Canadian provinces have written to the federal government asking for changes to the Canadian Federal Labor Code, just to make sure that there is some mechanism of all the labor disputes and to be able to negotiate. That's obviously important and needs to happen, but it can't come at a detriment of our economic corridors. So to make sure that all the binding arbitration and everything can go between the worker and the employer is extremely important, but to make sure that Canadians and the Canadian economy don't suffer because of that. So to make sure that that work can happen on behind closed doors, but yet the economy can still move is something that's very important. And I think there is some legislation that's being planned for this fall from the federal government to change that federal labor code. Because again, it is in the federal labor space of rail and ports that we're seeing much of these disruptions that have lasted the last few years here in Canada. So hopefully we'll get it right. But no, the federal government knows that they have allies, though, in the Western Canadian provinces, for sure.
It is the number one irritant. We have executives in key markets at all times, and that is the number one thing they will hear from customers who are looking for that reliable trading partner. And yes, that legislation is meant to be tabled in the fall, and it has to address the recommendations that were put forward in the Industrial Inquiry Commission some time ago now. So that needs to be acted on as a key priority. You can build all of the trade enabling infrastructure you want, but if you don't have the people there on a consistent basis to move it, it's all for naught.
There's a question, in the information age, the flow and movement of people is just as important as the flow of goods. Where do airports and passenger rail systems fit into the PNWER economic corridor strategy?
Well, for the passenger rail system, something that we've worked on here in Alberta for a few years is to try to see what it would look like from a high-speed rail between Edmonton and Calgary with a stop in Red Deer and our international airports. So that passenger rail backbone is something that we've been working on for quite some time. And we actually are now, again, open for business of having letters of expression of interest come out from rail consortiums from around the world to be able to see what they could do to build that high-speed rail corridor. So essentially, branching out from there is obviously very important, and working with both CP and CN to make sure that their logistics of cargo is obviously not impacted by any passenger rail facilities. Because obviously, when you're going into downtown Edmonton and Calgary, it gets very congested very quick. So to make sure that it's planned out properly so that you're not cannibalizing any of the cargo capacity that we have by rail, but also the opportunities and the economic benefits of passenger rail. So that's something that we're working on, as well as when it comes to airports, working on not just our international airports, but our regional airports to be able to increase passenger flow as well as cargo flow. So those are two big things that we've been working on here in Alberta.
Could I just make an observation around airports? I think what many people don't realize is that I think it's approximately 90%, and it may vary airport to airport slightly, but about 90% of the cargo in Canada actually moves in the belly of passenger aircraft. And so when you're thinking about economics, economics and passengers actually go hand in hand in terms of airport development and airport strategic planning. So if you look at some of the major airports in Western Canada, and Edmonton is an international airport, Calgary International Airport, two great examples where they're really looking at that integration of economic opportunities with their support for passenger travel. So they really do go hand in hand.
We've got just over 3 minutes left. Does anyone want to make some final words, final remarks?
I was going to go last this time.
Sure, I'll go first. These are exciting times. We've been talking about it. We have the Canadian public on board with getting things built. We have the political will across many provinces and political leaders. And there's projects that are in the very, very, very near horizon that are about to get to construction. And we're really looking forward to achieving some of those milestones. So let's keep up the momentum, and we're only going to do that if we keep collaborating across the region and with partners. It's exciting times.
Just building on that, I think that the goodwill and the momentum will help us work towards overcoming some of the challenges that we've noted during the course of this panel, whether those are bottlenecks or some regulatory uncertainty, infrastructure investment. I think that we need to really capitalize on this time to make progress. And I actually think PNWER is a very useful tool for helping to build some of that alignment. And conversations like this around the integration of economic corridors, energy, security, and others really help to put a fine point on not only the issues, but the opportunities that are facing the region.
Yeah, and I would just say something maybe to consider is just the focus on competition. That obviously we're all from different jurisdictions, but I think we can look at the competitive factor of what projects are being built in our own jurisdictions, and then how others can learn from how that got accomplished. So I know I have a friend down in Louisiana who's working on LNG facility that's right beside another LNG facility that was built a few years ago, that's beside the land that's building another LNG facility all along the coast. So to me, I keep peppering him with what's that regulatory process that you have? What is government doing to allow that type of expansion at that rate? So I think that competitive feeling is something that we should all be able to share and be able to talk about how we as a group, as a region, can be able to compete with the rest of the world to be able to get our products to market and to just strengthen our region. So that's what I would just say. And if now I'm just going to run out the clock here. I would just like to, again, thank everybody for being here today. I really appreciate that you made the trip up to Alberta. It doesn't always rain like this, but I'm a farmer, so I'm loving the rain. But now we're actually maybe at that point where we've got too much rain. But and so as a farmer, I have to complain about the weather. But no, I just wanted to thank everybody for being here. I hope everybody has an amazing time in Alberta, and God bless you, and God bless Alberta, and God bless Canada.
And please join me in thanking our panel.